Hello, my name is Megan Gimber and I work for People's Trust for Endangered Species, where I am the in-house hedgerow geek. Today I've got a few minutes to give you a brief overview of where we are with hedges nationally and what we need to be getting on with to make sure they live up to their impressive potential. First of all, what national targets have we got? Well, in DEFRA's Environment Improvement Plan, we've got a whopping target to plant and restore 45,000 miles of hedgerow by 2050. That's nearly twice the circumference of the Earth. So why are we looking to plant and restore so much? Well, partly to replace hedges that were lost last century. We've all heard the stories of farmers being paid to remove hedgerows in a bid for food production efficiency. Well, luckily we've changed our mind and the government have a better understanding of their wider value, and now we're looking to get some of these hedgerows planted back. And funnily enough, it's not just hedgerows, but these old Ordnance Survey maps also show how many hedgerow trees we've lost. The map on the left shows individually marked mature hedgerow trees, and the aerial image on the right shows how few remain now. Now, a few years ago, it was calculated that we'd need to be planting 30,000 trees per year in hedges just to stabilise the current population, and that was before ash died back, so we've got a lot to do. And we're not just putting hedges back for the sake of it, but for their wider benefits to society. Too many people see hedges as just an old school way of keeping the cows in, but out of sight, they also protect soils, provide pest control, pollinators, shade, shelter, browse, biosecurity, privacy, pollution reduction. And on top of all of this, they help on two of our current biggest threats: climate change and biodiversity loss. Hedges sequester and store carbon in their trees, in the above ground hedge structure itself, in their roots, and in the soils below and around them. In a fantastic paper by Sophie Drexler, she demonstrated that the carbon stock in mature hedges was larger than that of your average forest per hectare. More carbon than your average forest. Now, this is groundbreaking. And this might come as a surprise. It did to me. We think of forests and we can see all the carbon in the tree trunks and the branches. It's all visible. But when you break down the total hedgerow carbon stock, a much larger proportion is out of sight, stashed below ground in the roots and in the soil carbon. Hedgerows are also incredible for wildlife in general. Robert Walton, chair of the Devon Hedge Group and all-round hedgerow legend, counted 2,070 different species in just one hedge of 85 metres long. 2,070 different species. But hedges provide home, food, shelter and connectivity for a massive proportion of our wildlife, including bats, dormice, hedgehogs, butterflies, birds and other insects. They provide habitat for so many threatened species and prevent others from reaching this status in the first place. But they can only do this when they're in a good structural condition and they're managed in a way that can support wildlife. Now, I'm glad to say that outright hedgerow removal is largely behind us. In fact, I see more hedges being planted than ever before, and farmers are taking up the challenge of planting hedges at an impressive speed. I rarely find a farmer nowadays who hasn't either planted a hedge or has plans to. Farmers are at the coal face of climate change and wildlife decline. They see it, and I take great optimism from the response that I see from so many across the country. That said, I don't want to underestimate the scale of the challenge that we are facing. Removal is no longer the biggest threat to our hedges. We are losing them, but in a different way. Now, the most recent UK CEH Countryside Survey, a survey that has been undertaken every decade since the 1970s, has some very interesting findings. So first of all, the good news. The agri-environment schemes improve overall hedge condition. It is working. Agri-environment scheme farmers are more likely to lay hedges. Fantastic. Farmers maintain their hedges both for farming purposes, but also with a focus on wildlife. And the length of hedgerows being planted under options increased tenfold between 2007 and 2022. Hedge length under restoration in 2023 was 14 times that under restoration in 2007. These are all things worth celebrating. But unfortunately, there's also some not so good news as well. We have seen no significant change in the length of hedgerow nationally, which indicates that the rates of planting are only matching the rates of hedgerow loss. and they're not yet providing additionality. We are losing hedges as fast as we're planting them. 61% of the new hedges in the 2023 survey existed in 2007, but had since been lost and replanted. So are new hedges just replacing the loss of old ones? So why are we losing hedges? Well, it comes down to their management. If you overmanage a hedge, they start to look like this one on the left. If you undermanage a hedge, they start to run up into a tree line and they start to look like this hedge on the right. Now, over time, without a change, both routes lead to hedgerow decline and ultimately loss. So what's the right balance? Now, to me, both of these routes to hedgerow loss are worrying, but they are both symptoms of the same underlying cause, which means we can possibly fix both of them through similar actions. Both are what happens when we stop managing hedges on a life cycle. Both are what happen when we stop rejuvenating hedges through hedge laying. So what do hedges need to survive? Well, I think I've given the game away with that one here already. Hedges need periodic rejuvenation through laying or coppicing. Hedges are a succession habitat, and at the core, when they're at their absolute best, is when they're allowed to go through that succession process, changing over time. At some point, that succession takes them out of the Goldilocks zone, they over-mature maybe, and the structural condition, both for us as land managers and also for wildlife, are depleted. At, or preferably before that point, rejuvenation through hedge laying or coppicing basically will reset that succession cycle and force a hedge to go through that process again. Hedge laying involves cutting each hedge stem almost all the way through, right to the ground level, and bending it over the top to form a living fence. The living fence itself will regrow, creating dense, complex, robust hedges, fantastic for wildlife, but the magic happens at the base. On the right, you can see numerous new shoots that come from that cut base. This thickens the hedge right out from the bottom, which is of crucial importance to a huge proportion of wildlife, but also those shoots represent the next generation of that hedge. And this is how we've been managing hedges for almost as long as we've had hedges. We reset them through laying. We may trim them to maintain their density and to slow down that succession a bit, but eventually they get big, and when they can no longer keep the sheep in, we lay them again. No shrub in a hedge lives forever, but when we periodically lay them, we can make hedges immortal. So for any hedge layers in the room, I consider this craft a superpower. Through chainsaws, axes and billocks, we can turn a habitat with a set lifetime into something that can conceivably live forever. And it's the actions of farmers and hedge layers through many centuries, an unbroken chain of care, that we can thank for many of our ancient hedges still remaining today. Now, we no longer need to lay hedges to keep the sheep in. We do, of course, now have wire fencing, but the needs of hedges themselves haven't changed. And we must get back into a rejuvenation cycle if we want to keep our hedges going into the future. So, priority 1, get back laying hedges in life cycles to secure the future of the hedge. This means any new hedges we plant will, in fact, provide additionality. And then step 2, how do we make these hedges do more for wildlife to live up to their impressive wildlife potential? Now, first of all, a life cycle approach will naturally do a lot of this, as rejuvenation cycles creates thickness and structure in places where many species need it. But can we manage these refreshed hedges in a way to bring the most out of them? Well, hedges put on blossom and berries on second-year wood and older. So if we cut them at the same height every year, this cuts off most of their blossom and fruiting potential, a lot of their wildlife impact. Have you ever wondered why you've seen so many hawthorn hedges that don't flower? Annual trimming at the same height is the reason. But it neatly gives us 2 alternatives to our trimming approach. Either we don't cut them every year, or we don't cut them at the same height. Incremental trimming is just trimming hedges slightly higher and slightly wider each time we cut. This develops a good branching structure, but also means we have a band of second-year wood, sun-warmed wood, that can flower and fruit around the outside of our hedge every single year. And the results, I think, speak for themselves. This hedge is trimmed every year, but slightly higher and wider. This is what's achievable, even under an annual trimming regime for a hawthorn hedge. The other option, of course, is longer trimming rotations. The example shown here is from Martin Lines, and it shows how much a 3-year rotation impacts how much blossom we see on our hedges. If you've got the right equipment, you can easily take this up to 5-year rotation as well, again, increasing the amount of blossom that you get in the spring. And of course, with blossom comes fruit. Even if you have a hugely diverse hedge, if you're trimming it to the same height each year, it will not flower and fruit as much as it could do. Yet it should be remembered that these actions are great for wildlife, but the hedge sometimes needs more. A 3-year trimming cycle will not fix a hedge which has already declined to this point. Only rejuvenation and restocking can secure the longevity of hedges that have already declined like this. Which leads me to the need to understand the current condition of our hedges. In order to best navigate their management for wildlife and for their own future, we need to know what state they're already in. Now, PTS has a free Healthy Hedgerow app which can help. It's just 6 questions long, and it makes hedge assessment at the farm scale or the landscape scale much quicker and easier. It delivers instant advice on what approach each hedge might need. So in a nutshell, hedgerow management needs 2 different elements: rejuvenation and routine management. Now, rejuvenation is coppicing and laying cycles. Now, this is essential to every hedgerow to reset their succession and needs to happen every 30 or 40 years. It's a non-negotiable. And in the long term, hedges die without rejuvenation. Routine management is anything that we might want to do to a hedge in between. So if you're trimming, this might be incremental trimming or trimming on a 3 to 5 year cycle to maximise the blossom and berries of your hedge. Rejuvenation you can get grants for under the capital grant scheme, and we can get capital grants to pay for laying, coppicing and gapping up of our hedges. Now, the routine management, this tends to come in things like the SFIs or the countryside stewardship schemes, and again there's management options for different hedgerow management styles. Hedges can have a bright future when we switch up their management to include rejuvenation, when we see them as living habitats and not green walls. They are robust, resilient and fast to respond to good management. Not only that, we have over 400,000 miles of them nationally, about half which we can actively improve for wildlife, for carbon storage and for all of their wider values. So our priorities. We must retain our existent hedges, particularly our ancient species-rich hedges, through promoting and prioritising restoration, laying, coppicing, gap filling. Where appropriate, we can establish and retain more hedgerow trees. And then, of course, we can also be planting new hedgerows as and where they can be a benefit not just to our farming, but also to wildlife.